Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my TED Talk, where I will be speaking about one of the most important events in our world's history, the Islamic Revolution of Iran. You see, this was a revolution unlike no other. It was the only revolution that succeeded in blending Islamic governance with modern political structures. And to this day, this blend still affects Iran's internal and external policies. Many people, especially in the West, think of the Iranians as religious fanatics and maybe even think of Islamic Shiism as a cancer. How could the people of Iran throw away a secular government for a fanatic theocratic government? As easy as it may be to come to such conclusions, it never really is quite so black and white as one would make it out to seem. The Islamic Revolution, with more context, was a mixing pot of rising issues and concerns of not only religious and cultural identity, but also political repression, economic difficulties, Western influence, and dissatisfaction and unrest with the Shah. All of these issues helped to slowly isolate Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi with his people. Now, before I move on to what took place in 1978 and 1979, it is very important for us to delve deep into Iran's history and understand the country's complex socio-political landscape, which helped create the coup of '79, Shia Islam. Shia Islam became the religion of Iran after it was imposed by Shah Ismail I and his descendants, the Safavid dynasty. Prior to the Safavids, Iran was predominantly Sunni. Because of the Safavid religiosity, the Shia ulama built close ties with the Safavid, and the ulama profited from religious endowments. Many members of the ulama became very wealthy and powerful, and due to the Safavids granting the Shia ulama legal and political authority, it solidified the ulama's role in society and entrenched Shiism into Iran's political, cultural, and intellectual life. Now that we have a good understanding on why Shiism is so rooted in Iran, we can now move on to what many believe to be the beginning of a domino effect that made Iran what it is today, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. On May 26, 1908, a British geologist struck oil in Masjid al-Salaman, Khuzestan. The contract that this company had to be able to strike black gold in Iran was due to a British businessman named William Knox d'Arcy. In 1901, he negotiated a concession with Muzaffar ad-Din Shah Qajar. This 60-year concession was quite favorable to d'Arcy and the British. 16% of net profits from oil production would go to Iran under the Qajar and later under Reza Shah. The remaining net profits went to the Anglo-British Oil Company. Realistically speaking though, this concession changed thanks to Reza Shah's goals to modernize and secularize his nation. In 1925, Reza Shah came into power through a combination of both a coup and constitutional processes. To elaborate, in 1921, Reza Shah and his men occupied Tehran in an ultimate bloodless coup against the Qajar dynasty government. This in turn put Reza Shah in a position of Minister of War. Then in 1925, the Iranian parliament effectively let go of the Qajar dynasty due to weaknesses and turmoil and offered Reza Shah the throne, which began the Pahlavi dynasty on December 12, 1925. You see, Reza Shah was a strong authoritarian leader who ruled Iran with an iron fist, and he was the type to not let anyone get in his way when it came to his goals, not even the British. In the beginning of Reza Shah's ruling of Iran, he was much more pro-British. This is because he believed that a good relationship with the British was a necessity in modernizing Iran's military, infrastructure, and education. In 1933, Reza Shah renegotiated the d'Arcy concession with the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Reza Shah extended the agreement for another 60 years. But in return, the agreement would be more favorable for Iranians with benefits such as increased royalties for Iran. Another aspect to Reza Shah's nationalism was an element of pro-German Aryanism. You see, Reza Shah was very fond of Iran's Iran's pre-Islamic history and its Indo-European identity. In the 1930s, the Shah hired German technicians to modernize Iran with more infrastructure and more projects. But his respect for Germans was not just because of their racial and linguistic similarities, but because the Germans weren't British. And with the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the Shah chose to stay neutral. But with Great Britain's insatiable need for Iranian oil, they just couldn't take that risk, and the British demanded the Shah to kick out the German nationals that are helping to build Iran. Reza Shah declined, and that inclined the British and the Russians to invade Iran on August 25, 1941, which they ultimately succeeded in and exiled Reza Khan to Africa. He passed away in South Africa in 1944, and Reza Khan's son, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, took his father's place as the king of Iran on September 16, 1941, at the age of 22. Mohammad Reza continued to rule Iran and give the AIOC, Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, what they needed. Many of the Iranians, such as Mohammad Mossadegh, were unhappy with Reza Shah's obedience to the British exploitation of Iranian oil, and by April 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh became the Prime Minister of Iran under Mohammad Reza due to unwavering support by both liberals and conservatives such as the Tudeh Party and the Shia ulama. This was before the ulama realized his secular rhetoric. Mohammad Mossadegh soon nationalized Iranian oil, which was verified by the Iranian Majlis. Great Britain was unhappy with Mossadegh's nationalization of oil, so they sanctioned an embargo on Iran, creating a loss in jobs and rise in inflation. The Tudeh Party stayed patient, but for many Iranians, they began to lose their support for Mossadegh. Although Mossadegh began to lose some support, he was still too popular for Britain's MI6 to overthrow him. So they went to the Americans for support. The British portrayed Mossadegh as a communist threat to President Eisenhower. The CIA and the MI6 teamed up, and in August 1953, Mohammad Mossadegh was deposed due to a coup by the Iranian army, which was supported by the United States and the United Kingdom. After the fall of Mohammad Mossadegh, Mohammad Reza Shah returned to Iran from Baghdad, Iraq, and Mohammad Mossadegh was sentenced to 3 years in prison and life in house arrest, thanks to the coup. Thanks to the coup, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company continued to pump oil on Iranian soil, and by 1963, the Shah had begun a 6-point plan known as the White Revolution. These 6 points being land reforms, nationalization of forests and pastures, sales of state-owned enterprises, profit sharing for workers, literacy corps, and women's rights to vote. All of these points were because of the Shah's admiration of what the West was doing, and a lot of Iranians were not very happy with the Shah's level of admiration for the West and his rapid modernization of the country. Even though Iran's economy began to boost, extreme conservatives were furious with these reforms. Even the liberals were unhappy because of what happened to Mohammad Mossadegh. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the face of the 1979 revolution, began to speak against the Shah's regime on June 3, 1963, the 10th day of the holy month of Muharram, day of Ashura. By June 5th, Khomeini was arrested, and massive crowds in support of Khomeini took onto the streets of Tehran and other major cities to protest. Luckily for the Shah, the Prime Minister, Alam Asadullah, was a man who was not afraid to get his hands dirty, and he put Iranian troops on the street to suppress the crowds, which ended up killing hundreds of demonstrators before the protests ended. One thing the Shah's regime did not take into account was the already emotional atmosphere thanks to the month of Muharram. You see, the Islamic month of Muharram is engraved in the Shia faith. It is the month where the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, was martyred in the Battle of Karbala against Yazid ibn Muawiyah, the Caliph of the Umayyads. The deaths of these demonstrators on June 5th and 6th only strengthened the hatred of the Shah, and many compared the Shah to Yazid and the protesters as shaheeds, aka martyrs. Khomeini was later released from prison in August because of his promise to Savak to keep his mouth shut. But in 1964, he was exiled for giving a speech condemning Mohammad Reza Shah's new law that gave diplomatic immunity to the U.S. military personnel in Iran. With Khomeini in exile, tensions were still high, but much better for Reza Shah Pahlavi. In Iraq, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini began working on his ideological theories such as the very backbone of today's Islamic Republic, Waliyat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the jurist. This is regarded as one of his most controversial and influential theories that didn't just leave disagreements between the conservatives and liberals, but also within the religious ulama and practitioners themselves. Moving on to the 70s and Iran, the decade of rapid development and rapid implosion. In the beginning of the 1970s, Iran began to really feel the white revolution and rapid modernization of the country, with more American contractors than ever in the streets of Tehran and more money than the country has ever seen. The Shah was very, very obsessed with the thought of a modern Iran, an Iran that would rise beyond that of the UK and the US. Mohammad Reza would invest much of the oil income in his refineries would make into infrastructure and education. The Shah was more confident than ever, and he looked at his democratic allies in the mid-70s and began to see them as weak, given their suffering from recessions and inflation. The Shah even stating in an interview that the West need a restructure of their society, and the blue-eyed people need to wake up from their complacencies. On March 2nd, 1975, Mohammad Reza Shah implemented the Rastakhiz Party, which was the idea of a one-state party. The goal of the Rastakhiz Party was to ensure that all aspects of life in Iran fell in line with the political opinion and objectives of the Shah. Mohammad Reza Shah gave Iranians an ultimatum: either join the Rastakhiz Party or become a traitor who will either need to be imprisoned or exiled. Before long, thanks to the Rastakhiz Party, the number of books published per year against the Shah fell from 4,200 to 1,300, and many writers were imprisoned and tortured by Savak. As the Shah pushed further away from the idea of democracy, he had ordered Savak to remove copies of his very own book he had written due to its previous statements of freedom and democracy. Because of these reforms, Savak took part in thousands of unjustified arrests, and the Shah was receiving full backlash from not only the people of Iran, but from human rights organizations such as the Amnesty International, and even the Red Cross began acknowledging the Shah's secret police force torturing political prisoners, primarily targets of Rastakhiz such as the Bazaris and ulama. Even though the Shah had achieved a lot in the mid-70s by moving Iran forward in its development, his isolation from the Iranian people grew larger, and their support behind Khomeini grew larger than ever as well. Anti-Shah groups such as the leftist Marxist Fedayan, Mujahideen Khalq, and the Tudeh Party found themselves allied with conservative religious Iranians. The Shah's achievements began to rapidly implode on himself. The economic descent and power struggle being felt by Iranians on all sides helped Ayatollah Khomeini more than ever, and even those who weren't aligned with Islam found themselves following in Khomeini's words. Those who were mad about Mohammad Mossadegh, those who were anti-imperialist, and those who sought democracy. To many who studied Iran's revolution, it ironically seemed as if Iran began to truly fall apart right after President Jimmy Carter called Iran an island of stability and one of the more troubled areas in the world. When he visited Reza Shah Pahlavi at a New Year's event in Tehran late December. 1 week later, after Jimmy Carter visited Tehran on January 7, 1978, an article by the name of Iran and Red and Black Colonization was written by Ahmad Rashidi Mutlaq and published under the daily Persian newswire named Etela'at. Forgive me if I pronounced that wrong, which was very pro-Shah. This article calls out Ruhollah Khomeini as an Indian Saeed due to his family history of living in India, and calls him a foreign agent for the Red and Black colonization, red being the Marxist communists and black being the neo-colonialists. This sparked extreme outrage in the city of Qom, and many began shutting down bazaars and seminars. Religious students took to the streets, and by January 9th, several thousand pro-Khomeini protesters were out on the streets. The aftermath of this event led to the Shah's security force killing 5 protesters. 7 months later, on August 19, 1978, a popular cinema in Abadan, Iran, known as Cinema Rex, was attacked by 4 Islamic revolutionaries. These militants locked families inside of the cinema and lit the building on fire. 377 innocent Iranians were killed in this atrocity, and immediately Ruhollah Khomeini was quick to blame Savak for this fire. Thousands of Iranians filled the streets yelling, "Death to the Shah." A month later, on September 8, 1978, 90 anti-Shah protesters were killed in Jaleh Square, also known as Black Friday. Now, keep in mind that all of this is happening while Khomeini is importing his audio tapes into Iran and having his sermons played in mosques all across the country. On January 16, 1979, Reza Shah Pahlavi left Iran to Egypt for asylum, and on February 1st, 1979, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Tehran on an Air France jet. Iran officially became an Islamic Republic on April 1st, 1979. Iranian leftists soon began to realize the mistake they've made. The newly placed Islamic Republic was quick to suppress the leftist view and even grew hostile towards the Marxist organizations they had once supported Khomeini, such as the Mujahideen-e-Khalq. To this day, many of the promises that the Islamic Republic made were never kept, such as the 8 demands by the Kurdish delegates. Those who once supported Khomeini were unable to speak up, as his new regime was much more swift to take out his political enemies. And many today believe that the end of the Shah was the end of peace in the region of the Middle East. Also, because of the wrongdoings of the Islamic Republic of Iran, many Iranians today find themselves to be much more secularized than their older generation. Thank you everyone for listening to my TED Talk. It truly was an honor for me to stand in front of you today to teach you the history behind the Islamic Revolution and why everything in that great nation happened. Thank you.